Good afternoon. I am Viola Crawford, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Central Delaware County and the NAACP Media Branch, welcome and thank you for joining us today for our expert-led panel on Part 2 of Financial Inequities in the Criminal Justice System. Many thanks to our Civic Education Committee members for organizing this program today. And many thanks to our presenters and panel moderator, Lee Awbrey from the Delco Public Defender's Office. Lee Awbrey is First Assistant to the Delaware County Public Defender and the former Chief of Appeals in the Montgomery County Office of the Public Defender. In those capacities, Lee has advocated extensively to address causal factors or causal factors leading to modern debtor prisons and to fight improper pretrial detention practices that disproportionately jail poor and marginalized people. Her legal career includes a stint as a staff attorney with the Public Interest Law Center, which is one of the organizations representing the League of Women Voters and others in their education equity lawsuit. Lee is a graduate of UC Berkeley School of Law. She is now rooted in Delco's Bureau of Rutledge, a town known to just a few, but loved by many. We are also most grateful for the help of Kathy Youngman for her technology support and recording of the program. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan civic organization, encourages informed and active participation in citizenship, elections, and democracy, and works to increase understanding about major public policy issues through education and advocacy. Today's program on financial inequities in the criminal justice system is moderated by Lee Awbrey of the Delco Public Defender Office. She will moderate a panel of experts on financial inequities in the criminal justice system, including the economic impact of incarceration and criminal records on prisoners, parolees and families, employment prospects, social impacts, court fees, and more. The panel will discuss different current locations and interventions being offered by both government and concerned community groups. Lee will introduce our panel when we begin the program. We received many of our excellent questions prior, and these were shared with Lee. Please utilize the chat function and ask any additional questions. Also, we are recording this event, and a link to the recording will be sent to those that registered. The recorded program will also be available on our website, LWV-CDC.org. Lee, take it away.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to you all for hosting. We have with us today three amazing individuals who have had the pleasure to meet in various capacities. And I think they will have a lot of interesting insights, and we'll only be able to tap a small portion of their brains with regard to these topics. But I want to be mindful of the fact that one of our presenters is Representative Mike Zabel, who is on a tight timeline before he's called back in to legislate on our behalf. So I'm going to quickly introduce our two other panelists, jump right into some questions for Representative Zabel, and then circle back to give those other two panelists a deeper intro to which they are due. We'll start with Andrew. Christie is here. He's an attorney with the ACLU. We also have Maurice Jones, who co-founded and operates People Advancing Reintegration Inc.'s Recycle Works, and we will hear more about those individuals and their efforts shortly. And we have with us Delaware County Representative Michael Zabel, who is a member of Pennsylvania House of Representatives. He's represented the 163rd District since 2019. After graduated from St. Joseph's Prep School in 1996, Rep. Zabel went on to earn a bachelor's degree from the College of Holy Cross in 2000. He earned his master's from Temple University in 2003 and his JD from Temple Law School in 2010. He's taught Latin and Greek at middle and high school levels and served as an assistant district attorney in Philadelphia, but we don't hold that against him here at the Office of the Public Defender. And he's also on the board of a charity, SJP Man for Others, which I admittedly do not know much about. He and his wife live with their 2 children in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. So good afternoon, Rep. Zabel.
Good afternoon, Lee. Thank you for that introduction. And I apologize to the group here. I wish I could stay longer, but we are currently, the legislature is in session this week. And we're going to begin voting a little bit in the afternoon. So I don't want to take up, I wish I could stay longer, because it's certainly, this is a topic that we could certainly discuss for hours, if not days and weeks. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be with the panelists that are on this panel.
Well, our first question for you is, recognizing the topic of this panel, there are different systems. We have a juvenile justice system and an adult system, and of course, consequences of detention, convictions, costs and fines apply in both systems. I am aware that you are currently serving on the Governor's Juvenile Justice Task Force, and there's a lot of energy and a lot of initiative going on there at this moment. So while we have you, I just kind of wanted to tap your expertise in that area.
Sure. We've been looking at data for a year, hearing from stakeholders, different groups, advocates, probation officers, judges, prosecutors, you name it, talking and children who have been, or youth who have been through the system, and families and victims as well. But we've been looking at the data for what works and what doesn't work in the juvenile justice system. And perhaps not surprisingly, we found some of the issues that are the theme of this discussion. They run through both the juvenile system and the adult criminal justice system, which are, if you are not of great economic means, you're more likely to be adjudicated or convicted, and you are more likely to spend time incarcerated or in placement, as referred to it with youths. What we have found in the juvenile system is that financial impediments, like fines and fees, can cause a juvenile to be referred into the courts, into the juvenile justice system, which is basically a poverty tax when it comes to paying a fine or fee. And once they get into the system, generally speaking, the system, if a juvenile is exposed to it, the system tends to make it extend their stay. They tend to be there a little longer. It generally doesn't have the positive effect that you would hope for. It makes them more likely to stay in the system longer, the younger they get in. So one of the things we've been looking at with regards to fines and fees, for example, we'll be issuing our final report in next week, as a matter of fact, but it's about getting rid of those fines and fees that are essentially, they create a disparate economic impact, and they also create a disparate racial impact. We have found that specifically in Delaware County, for example, historically has had places more young Black males into its system than they are representative of their population. So we know something's happening there that is not that is racially disparate and unequal, and we're trying to work on that. This is the same thing we deal with in the adult system. And I want to mention, because we're talking about it, and I have to condense my remarks. We just ran 2 bills. I know the ACLU, Alex is probably aware of these. We just had 2 bills come through our judiciary. One was a glorified mandatory minimum bill, which we know has devastating economic impacts. Well, aside from the moral implications of it, but it has disparate racial impacts. It breaks up families. It removes a workforce. We have a workforce shortage in Pennsylvania, and part of that is because we're locking people away for decades at a time, taking families apart. And what we've started to look at with this now is it's time to rethink criminal justice. So in the 90s, Democrats and Republicans, they believed in this tough on crime thing, where they believed it was just longer sentences would somehow deter. What we know now is that they don't deter, and they come at an enormous cost, not just economically, although it costs the state an enormous amount of money. Its prison population is a huge cost driver in Pennsylvania, but it also costs families. It also costs workforce. So it really doesn't make sense for us as a Commonwealth. And where we're starting to look, or at least we're trying to drag the legislature kicking and screaming sometimes into, is what if we invest in keeping people out of the system? What if we invest in finding ways to preventative care, basically, for regard to the criminal justice system, rather than dealing with locking people away and warehousing them and treating that like it's solving the problem? Because I think we've had decades now worth of this tough on crime, and it just doesn't work. With that said, legislators continue to do it. There's a bad bill that was coming out of our committee. I voted against it, but that would effectively remove bail in gun violence cases. Well, it sounds great in the sense that you want to do something about gun violence, but the fact is, for too long in America, not just Pennsylvania, we have used bail as a de facto method, or setting a high bail or no bail at all, as a de facto method of keeping someone, of imprisoning someone before they become convicted of anything. And of course, that the people who can't afford bail tend to be of lesser economic means, and it does also have a racial disparate impact as well. So we've got to look at all of those things. And I will say, I'm slightly optimistic. Our legislature is beginning to acknowledge that more and more. But we are still, especially in more rural parts of the area, that tough on crime mentality has been very successful, or at least politically for them, and they're reluctant to get away from it. But what I suspect everybody on this panel knows, but one of the conversations we need to have about is, when it comes to deterrence, which is what they use for these long prison sentences, we know they don't work, but what we do know is it's not so much the severity of the punishment, it's the certainty of being caught that drives deterrence. So to the extent we have community engagement and we can invest in the front side of that and not rely on these big jail sentences, because they just don't drive people away. And when it comes to the juvenile justice system, if we can spend our money on programs that give kids diversions and opportunities. There's a great one in Philly called Students Run Philly Style that gives them a chance to go out and to channel their energy in a good way. We don't have to spend, it costs the state sometimes up to $200,000 a year to pay for a child that's been placed in a residential placement. That's I have 2 kids. If they cost me $200,000 a year, well, I don't know. I wouldn't be doing this probably. I'd be begging for money, but it doesn't make sense. Of course, it makes better sense to have programs and solutions and diversions that don't put people in the system, rather than spending money to lock people away for their lives. So I know I covered a big, broad area there, but I wanted to give you a general sense of the discussions that we're having in the legislature. But there is still very much a push against mandatory minimums are the topic du jour. And we've got to have a real conversation about them, because the realities for politicians, they look great sometimes. They say, I'm going out and I'm fighting crime. But we have to be smart on crime. We have to have policies that work and are fair. Because at the end of the day, if we're not being fair, I mean, those are the core tenets of what this country was founded on. Our 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments are huge. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long. I hope Lee, I might be able to get in one more if you have a specific thing you want me to touch
Terrific.
on.
I love hearing you talk. And I imagine that there are lots of questions about many of the things you raised. You touched lightly on one of the questions we have, which is about what is the economic impact of incarceration on taxpayers versus rehabilitation initiatives. But I know that the participants on this call are action-oriented, engaged individuals. And one of the questions that comes up for everybody is kind of what initiatives are out there now that individuals or organizations can get behind or assist in order to affect change that is really going to assist the individuals and families who are being harmed by our current systems.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy answer, but I think community-based outreach and community-based alternatives and keeping people in their homes as much as we can, as opposed to outsourcing them to an institution. That's true for both juveniles and for youth. In the short term too, I mean, just without putting on partisan hats, politically, we need to let our legislators know that we don't want this old school eye for an eye approach to criminal justice, because it does cost taxpayers a fortune. I am not typically aligned with the Koch brothers and the work they do, but they happen to believe, and they agree. They look at it from the economic side and go, this does not make sense for us as a state. While I embrace that line of thinking as well, I mean, I think there's a moral argument too, of course, that we shouldn't be doing this, but it costs the state. Our prison population in Pennsylvania has been going down, but it is still an enormous cost driver. And if it doesn't have a deterrent effect on crime, of course, we should be looking at other ways, other methods of deterrence and rehabilitation too, because rehabilitation gets lost in this sometimes as well, and is not often enough of focus in our, what I would call the corrections end of our criminal justice system. So I think it's probation reform, for example, is a big part of what we have to work towards. If you or I or anybody else here were on probation, you'd have a hard time complying with the terms. They are tough because you got to go to your work, you got to do that, and then you got to check in with it. It is tough. And if legislators knew how tough probation was, they'd be a little more forgiving of reform. And that's another effort for another day. But
thank you. I know that we have people on this call, such as Dr. Joan Zabel and others who work a lot with trauma and are concerned with trauma with regard to our adults and our youth. Do you, in your work in the Juvenile Justice Task Force or elsewhere, have you gained knowledge about how incarceration and our current system leads to trauma or provides opportunities to heal from trauma?
The former. One of the places, so we're going to be pushing Pennsylvania to move towards more trauma-informed treatment or care or programs. But what we have found, for example, with youth, there has been this push in Pennsylvania for a while to put juveniles who are accused of serious crimes into adult prisons. Well, guess what that does? That doesn't help it at all. And that can be quite a traumatic experience, particularly when you have a 15-year-old put into an adult population at an adult prison. That is about as traumatic as it comes, and leads to recidivism and leads to escalation in terms of the kind of things that we want to avoid. So it is trauma-informed programs and evidence-based programs are what we need to get towards, and we need to sort of look at it that way. It's easier in some ways to have that conversation when you're talking about children, because I think everybody understands. I mean, the science of the brain, we now know we are not done developing. I feel like we should never really be done developing, but like the psychological decision-making parts of your brain are perhaps not even fully formed into your mid-20s. I had a colleague, a client. I had an innocence project case for a guy named Tyrone Jones, and he was convicted of a murder that he committed allegedly. I'm still going to say allegedly because he had an innocence claim too. When he was 17, and he was sentenced to mandatory life without parole until the United States Supreme Court a few years ago, a different Supreme Court, but said you cannot have a mandatory life without parole statute for a crime that somebody commits in a juvenile, because your brains change. Like you have to at least allow. We have to. It's cruel and unusual punishment. It was a really powerful decision that, unfortunately, since subsequent iterations of the court, I think are walking back a little bit. But it is based on our understandings of the brain and best practices and sort of all trying to get to what do we want out of our justice system? Is this just a lock them up and throw away the key approach? And I think more and more people are saying, no, we've got to think about, but trauma can be on both sides of a juvenile justice case or an adult criminal involvement. So it's important. And I had to learn that as a prosecutor, by the way. That was an important thing. Prosecutors are theoretically always supposed to do the right thing. I tried to in my year, but you'll have to check with the PDs in Philadelphia to see if they agree. I hope.
Sounds like you have a compass there that's in place. So we have some questions. We're going to milk you for all the time you've got.
Sure. I think I can probably get in a minute too. Yeah.
Terrific. One of the questions we have is, are you familiar with youth courts?
Yes, but not as much as I was before I came into the juvenile. I worked in, I was not a juvenile prosecutor, but I've become very familiar with them in the course of the last year. So the short answer.
There is another question about, can you give an example of the fees and fines a juvenile has to pay at the start? I think that Andrew Christie will also be able to speak to this. It blends into a question that I have with regard to the Juvenile Justice Task Force, which is, what do we learn about, like, are kids getting put in detention centers for court debt?
They can. Well, they can get, so let's say a youth has a summary offense. That could be something as, I don't know, as trifling as like smoking on school ground, or, you could get something like that, where you might get a fine as part of that summary offense, and they simply, if that fine's $65, I'm just picking a number, they may not have that. Or it can be, if you don't show up for a summary hearing, you can be fined as a result of that. once you have that, and you don't pay that, or you don't show up and you're found in contempt, that is grounds to refer you into the more formal juvenile justice system. And a lot of the time it's payment that you just can't make. It's as simple as that. And it's not a restorative. We're not even talking about necessarily victims restitution, although I think that should probably be capped as well in some way. Because one of the things we did when we were putting this task force together is talk to a lot of youth in the system, and they get paid, they do work, but they get paid peanuts. They get paid below minimum wage, and they're supposed to be working towards restitution, and they're making whatever it is, 75 cents an hour. You go, well, this is like degrading, insulting, and not respecting the value of work, period. But it's also, how in the world are they ever supposed to pay off? Let's say they broke a window, a store window or something, and just pick something like that. And that's a couple $100s. They could be working on that forever. And if they have to stay in just to pay that off, that's a punishment on poverty. It's a punishment for being poor, because there are families that could take care of that right off the bat and potentially even avoid being involved in the juvenile system. But fines and fees, court fines and fees, if hopefully you don't have the experience, but if you've ever been involved in anything, think of a traffic ticket, actually, for example, if you get a speeding ticket, look at when they break it down, you always, if you've ever I have confessed I have gotten a speeding ticket, and you look and you go, okay, there's the fine, and then there's like 7 surcharges, and you go, boy, that adds up quickly. It's kind of like that in court. You'd be surprised that how much of it adds up. And you can have debt, and if you're a kid and you don't have the money and your parents don't have the money, it feeds you into the system. And guess what? You get more fines and fees then. It's an endless cycle. It is. We abolished a debtor's prison, but in some places, in some instances, debtor's prison is effectively what our justice systems are doing.
And if I want to write my legislature or try and address some of those issues with probation that you mentioned earlier, are there specific act numbers or individuals who might be well targeted?
Yes, I'll have to get that back to you on that, because last session it was 1555, and I'm not sure if somebody's introduced the bill yet right now. I think Jordan Harris, Rep. Jordan Harris, who's our minority whip in the House, it was his bill last session, I believe, and it should be his, but he's an important person to talk to. And I'd be happy to, I can send that information along to share.
Terrific. Anything you email to me, we will get circulated.
Super. And unfortunately, I think I have to duck now, but, and I'm sorry I can't stay to hear the others, because you've got some real sharp people. So I look forward, I appreciate the time. And if you ever have questions or thoughts, please send them to my office. I'm always happy to hear from them, and take a look at the Juvenile Justice Report when it comes out next week, because I think it'll have some things that are worth being excited about.
Absolutely will do. Thank you so much. Very appreciative of your work and your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that was an energized start, but certainly not the only highlight we have. So I'm glad that we were able to get Rep. Zabel while he was here, but I'm also glad to have the opportunity now to transition to the other speakers who are joining us and give them the proper introduction to which they are due. Andrew Christie has already provided us with some helpful information in the comments section. He's got a lot of information about costs and fines, and we'll be directing some more questions to him. I will start by saying Mr. Christie is a very modest attorney. So anytime I ask him for his bio, I get like 1 line, and I managed to squeak 3 out of him. I'm informed that his wife in the background may laugh if I get too if I praise him too much, but I'm going to provide you with the 3 lines and then a little commentary of what I have observed with regard to the level of technical assistance that he has given public defenders and others around the state in order to address these issues. The ACLU of Pennsylvania. He's worked extensively on issues involving fines, costs, and restitution across Pennsylvania since he joined the ACLU in 2016. He's a graduate of the University of Delaware and Georgetown University Law Center, and prior to working at the ACLU, he has 2 judicial clerkships and worked at a mental health law nonprofit. I've gotten to know Mr. Christie in a professional capacity that's turned personal, because I'm constantly calling on him on the phone for quick assistance. And I'm always amazed at how encyclopedic his head is with quick case reference or whatever. He is not only doing constant advocacy across the state to reduce debtors prison, and to get, often just to get judges and others to follow the law that exists, but also to push the law in the direction that it needs to go in order to balance out some of the economic inequity around the state on these issues. But in addition to his personal work on individual cases, he's also just been an ongoing reference to attorneys and others throughout the state. And sometimes he is aware of a cost fines restitution opportunity to advocate before the actual attorney who's working on that case is aware. He's a speaker for the criminal defense bar in various capacities, and we're very glad to have him here today. So I will be directing some questions to him, but I also want to introduce Maurice Jones, who is co-founded and operated the People Advancing Reintegration, which is I've never known that that is what PAR stands for, but it's Recycle Works, a very well-respected organization that prosecutors and public defenders alike think of as a great resource for those with whom we work. It was founded in February 2016 and has continued to be an innovative movement in workforce development and training. Mr. Jones, after completing high school in Lansdale, he served in the Navy. So thank you for your service. He received an associate's degree from Delaware County Community College and is pursuing his MBA in Business Administration at Temple University. He coaches basketball in CYO, Narberth Summer Basketball League, Urban Youth Kings, and Queens League in Mount Airy, where the hope is to capture the minds of the young through play and be a role model. He's also a mentor with Big Brothers, Big Sisters in Philadelphia. As a returning citizen, he's uniquely qualified to identify and support the needs of those who seek guidance at PAR Recycle Works, looking to build their lives. He serves as a resource in a number of reentry programs in the Philadelphia area, and hopefully we will be able to drag him to the Delaware County area soon. And is on the Strategic Planning Committee of the Philadelphia Reentry Coalition. So PAR Recycling Works is his way of restoring lives and saving the earth. He lives in Cheltenham Township with his wife and 5 children. So welcome and thank you both. So I'm going to just start with Andrew because we've already kind of blended into this topic of costs and fines. And I'm wondering, can you just give us a brief overview of how people accumulate court debt? What is this we're talking about when we throw out terms like debtor's prison?
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for that embarrassing introduction. And also, Maurice, you have 5 kids. My God, that's a lot of work. So anyways, thank you all for letting me join today. There are basically 3 different types of cases, I guess is maybe the place to start. We've already talked a lot about juvenile cases, which is what the representative was talking about. And as I put in the chat and to try to respond to a Jones question, juveniles often can end up owing, $400+ which I didn't have $400 laying around when I was a juvenile. That's for sure. Just in terms of court costs. And then you have proceedings before a magisterial district judge. So the traffic ticket, for example, that the representative got, those tickets often run maybe $200+ just in terms of court costs, plus maybe a small fine. And then the major driver of this court debt are felony and misdemeanor convictions before the Court of Common Pleas. And in Delaware County, that's going to run you at least $1,600 in court costs. Delaware County is actually one of the most expensive counties in Pennsylvania. They charge more in terms of court costs than just about any other county. And I just want to also provide a little bit of explanation of the terminology I'm using. So I'm talking about court costs and making a distinction between that and a fine. And there really are 3 types of these financial obligations, this 3 types of court debt. And how much it matters for our conversation, I'm not exactly sure. I guess we'll see how it goes. It matters a lot in the legal world because different laws apply to different types of court debt and they're treated differently. So you have fines, and that's what we think of in terms of punishment. You've done something wrong. You have to. It's like the equivalent of a jail sentence. You have to face some sort of penalty for what you've done. So that's what the fines are. And then you have court costs, and court costs are the largest part of the court debt that's assigned. That's the defendants have to pay after they're convicted. You often will have, if you've ever watched a criminal proceeding at sentencing, you'll see the judge say like, oh, pay a $25 fine plus court costs. Well, what they don't tell you is that there's court costs, it could be hundreds or even thousands of dollars. The court costs are not supposed to be punishment. In theory, they're supposed to sort of be a reimbursement to the government for the expense of prosecuting your case. In practice, what's happened over the past 30 years is that as the legislature doesn't want to raise taxes, they've decided to try to fund not only the criminal justice system, but also a host of other initiatives off the backs of criminal defendants. And that works to some extent. Like if you have Bill Cosby, for example, he can pay a few $1,000s in court costs, no problem, and the government actually gets some money. But then with the problem that you run into is with a lot of this essentially bad debt, where Lee is a public defender, so her clients, if her clients end up with $1,600 in court costs, the available data from the court system, the court's own numbers tell us that odds are that money's never going to get paid. Some of that might be because defendants are thumbing their nose at the court, but a lot of that, in my experience, is really because already struggling to try to pay housing, take care of 5 children. I mean, that's expensive. And when you have these sort of just day-to-day expenses that add up, and add on top of that a criminal conviction that limits your employment opportunities, it really puts a massive strain on a person's finances. And if you can't meet those basic life needs, then you're certainly not going to have any money left over to pay the court after that. And so what we see is that there are court costs. I'm just flipping through my notes here. The court costs not only sort of keep the lights on, or at least are intended to try to keep the lights on in the courthouse, but also go to things like funding salaries for district attorneys. They fund salaries for probation officers, although they don't fund any salaries for the public defender's office, for better or worse. They fund civil legal aid services. So our local legal aid organization, the Legal Aid of Southeastern Pennsylvania, some of their money actually comes from court costs that are paid by defendants. And so it's that sort of thing where the legislature has tried to shift more of this off of general tax revenue and onto defendants that sees that bill going up. I mean, I think there's even in the past decade, there's been an increase in the amount of court costs that are imposed on these defendants. And so the problem is that what happens when someone can't afford them, and that's where you get into issues of what we refer to as essentially as modern debtors' prisons. I mean, I've been involved in cases across the state where defendants are literally put in jail because they can't afford to pay money. I've been in court for example, in Lebanon County, where I had a client who was not represented, had no lawyer at the time, and told the judge, well, I'm homeless right now. I could try to go sell my blood plasma and try to use the money from that to give you some money. Please don't put me in jail. And the judge put him in jail for 30 days. And we've had a lot of success in my time at the ACLU in putting an end to those practices through litigation and the sort of thing that the ACLU does. But it's not just about incarceration. There are people who can't afford to pay their court debt, have their driver's licenses suspended. Which of course is counterproductive, because then you can't get to work and get a job to actually pay these fines and costs or restitution to victims. In Delaware County, there's a long-running problem where the court just sort of keeps people on probation forever until they pay all their court debt. Even if you're on you could be paying the judge could say, I understand all you can pay is $25 a month and that you're paying that, but because you haven't paid all, $5,000, you're just going to sit on probation until you pay all that off, which you heard the representative say. I mean, complying with the conditions of probation is not easy and puts you at further risk of reincarceration for simple things like, missing your check-in with your probation officer. You can actually lose, if you owe this court debt and are behind on your payments, you can actually lose access to public assistance like TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, which is really all the cash assistance we have left in this state. You can also lose access to food stamps. And down the road, maybe you've cleaned your life up, you're ready to get back on the right path. You want to seek, for example, a pardon from the governor. Well, you can't do that unless you've paid unless somehow you've come up with all these thousands of dollars to pay this court debt. And I'll stop there so that Maurice can hop in and talk about what he's seen and the impact it has on the folks he works with. But there's just I just want to make it clear that sometimes judges think, oh well, if I'm not putting the person in jail, then it doesn't really matter that they owe all this money. Well, it does actually matter, and we see regularly that people skip paying other bills, get into greater debt with credit card companies or with their utility companies because they are trying to pay this court debt and because they're afraid they're going to go to jail. And it's not that, again, it's not that they're thumbing their nose at the court, it's that they really are just of limited financial means.
And I do want to hop over to Mr. Jones shortly to address a couple of things that came up when you were talking, Andrew, one of which are just kind of the hurdles of employment that someone faces after conviction, and also the real life stories of how these fines play out once someone is in the place in their sentence where they're really able to start moving on and trying to rebuild. But before I do that, I was caught on something you said about Delaware County being the more expensive than the surrounding counties. I'm trying to understand, how does that happen? Because the costs and fines are something that come out of, like, they're authorized by statewide statutes. So how is it that Delaware County ends up being more expensive?
Yeah, that is an interesting question that I don't entirely know the answer to, but my hypothesis based on my experience is that judges and so state law allows, and in fact, Lee and I were just involved in some litigation around this, and state law allows judges to reduce or even waive those court costs for people who can't afford them. And the reason for that is that although I have plenty of things to complain about with respect to the legislature, as I think all of us do, luckily the representative isn't here anymore, so I can bad talk to the legislature if I need to. But despite that, the legislature has actually recognized that this is a problem and has given authority to judges to reduce those fines and reduce those court costs for defendants who can't afford to pay them. So I think that what we see is an unequal, statewide and unequal use of that authority. And so if you end up with I'll say it, a good judge who understands the poverty issues, understands that you're not going to be able to pay this stuff if you're impoverished, then you have those amounts reduced. But if you end up with a bad judge, and at least in this context, who really is not interested in that and thinks like, oh, you've committed this crime and I'm going to make you pay every last cent, even if it takes you the rest of your life, and even if the data says you're never going to be able to pay it, then you end up with these high amounts of money. And so in Delaware County, we see that the average one of Lee's clients, an average public defender client, comes out owing $1,600 in court debt. That is actually the same amount that a private lawyer has. So, if you have one of our indigent clients, and you have, I'm just going to use Bill Cosby as the example again, and you have Bill Cosby, they're both going to get about the same amount of money coming out that they owe. And I mean, the legislature doesn't want that to happen because they've recognized and that there is this inherent inequity in that, because when it comes to financial things, giving everyone the same financial penalty actually leads to unequal outcomes. And in just about every other county, there are actually big differences between people with private counsel versus public defenders. So there's a study on our website, on the ACLU's website, which I'm sure we can give a link to after this. But in Montgomery County, for example, people with private lawyers get about $1,300 in court costs, but people with public defenders only get about $500 in court costs. So, I think that we could talk later about maybe what you all can do to help make sure that your local court is doing the right thing and reform and that sort of thing. But there really are differences, I think, from county to county in terms of how these places operate.
Thank you. Don't get too comfortable. You're not totally off the hook. I did miss a very important comment in the comment section that Andrew is also an avid native plant gardener, and I can attest that his tips are helpful. There was a question about what the three types of court debt are when we were giving that overview, and it's costs and fines, and then the third is restitution.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I distracted myself. So absolutely. So the third type is restitution. And I think that the important point, so restitution is compensation to a victim. So you have the fine that is the punishment, the court costs, which are sort of like a tax, like a user tax, and then restitution, which is compensation to the victim. And I think that what we would like to see is we'd like to see more of an effort focused on restitution and making sure that victims are compensated at least as much as the defendant can. Sometimes the defendant just doesn't have the money necessary to provide that full compensation. But right now we have a system that if you pay $100 to the court, 50% of that goes to fines and costs, and 50% of that goes to restitution. I mean, that makes sense, I guess, if you're trying to, again, really squeeze money out of defendants to pay the court system. It doesn't make a lot of sense if our priority should be compensation to the victims and making the victims as whole as possible. And so, I mean, that's just one other problem with the existing system is that, if we're going to do any court debt, let's focus on restitution, and fines and costs really just are not as important by comparison.
Thanks, Andrew. Maurice, I am wondering, can you start us off by telling us about PAR recycling work? I think it's an amazing program, and I think most people here aren't that familiar with it. Although I believe before our session started, someone reported that they had just dropped off some electronics, which is exciting, or something of that sort.
Absolutely, Lee. So let me take a step backward first and talk about prisons in totality, because we talked about courts and like PAR is like after prison, but let's talk about prison because it's like the in between. And so prison is the system that has been set up for 4 major reasons. There's retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation, right? And so we had touched on it a little bit. At present, there's about 70% of all people in the first 3 years will go back to prison for some shape or reason, right? And so that's the recidivism rate. That's the rate of how many people return back to prison. So if there was any other system that produced a 30% success rate, what would happen to that business? We talk about hospitals. They only presented 30% of people came and were able to get well and rehabilitate. They would fail. What about the school system, right? Or a college. Let's talk about a college that only produced 30% of graduation rate. That school would fail, right? And so this is a system that has consistently failed in what it set out to do, right? And I say that to say 94% of all people that go to prison come home. They're not away for life. That may be a misconception. They're all long sentences. But 94% of all people have a target to come home. And there's a very little focus on individuals' rehabilitation. And so, me for one, I believe that word should be changed to transformation, because rehabilitation leaves open the door for somebody to go back to where they were, right? So if you transform one's mind, they no longer have that function to return back to where they were, right? Or to relapse in that sense, right? And so there's a huge cost for prison. There's a huge cost in the budget and the budgetary constraints for prison, right? When we take some of those monies away, whether it be from the juvenile or adult population, what's going to happen to those monies? That's going to free up some monies to go X, right? We don't know what that X is because Rep. Zabel isn't here, so he can't tell us. But there is an X. Where's that going to go? And we should absolutely know exactly where those monies are going to go. And are they going to be equitably proportioned to where they need to be focused, right? Here in Philadelphia, right, where our office is, we know that it's not a deterrent because the murder rate here in Philadelphia is so high. So going to prison is not something is deterring people from going there. I mean, so that's not one of the things that is known. Is it? And I'm not sure if it's any of those things, actually. I don't know if it's even justice. My understanding that mass incarceration and mass probation and mass prisoner indebtedness, those are weapons of mass destruction that are used against Black and brown people at a disproportionate rate. Here in Philadelphia, the Public Defenders Association did a study from 2017 to 2019. there were 373,000 arrests. And I'm sorry, 373,000 police stops. Of those police stops, 80% were Black and brown men. So that's just from a policing standpoint. So if you have that many of disproportionate people that you are policing, of course you're going to have an alarming amount of an arrest rate, which will then turn into incarceration. Let's take, Saturday is Juneteenth. I mean, I can't move that out of my mind, and I very well wanted to mention it. There's a direct correlation between slavery and mass incarceration, right? And so the police force in totality was built behind slavery and right after the end of slavery. And so that's the foundation of the police force and the disproportionate amount of how people are policed. So we have to start there. I don't know what those answers are, but we are trying to be a solution. So I wanted to start there with the framework of like policing and the way people are policed, and then jump into, PAR. So PAR does stand for People Advancing Reintegration. We are a nonprofit that's built on reducing recidivism through electronics recycling. And the electronics recycling came about by, we were inside of the now closed Graterford. We were volunteering with individuals inside Graterford prison and tried to come up with some solutions to why is there a revolving door around recidivism? Why are people coming back and forth? The men that were inside of Graterford prison challenged us to say, hey, listen, there's no place for these men to go, create a job for them to go. And so that sparked us to do something. We didn't know what we were going to do. We heard a program on the radio about a place doing electronics recycling in Indianapolis. We went out there and we were absolutely blown away by their impact. They employ 250 people on a regular basis, and they do electronics recycling. And so we said, we absolutely can bring that to Philly in some shape or way or form. And we said, we have a table, a drill, and a hammer, and we don't know how to start. And they said, that's exactly how we started. And so that was the catalyst for us to begin. We employed 2 people at the very, very beginning. And we've cycled through about 200 employees since our inception in 2016. And of those 200, 3 have gone back to prison. So we're bucking the system of recidivism through the training. The trainings consist of digital and financial literacy, because individuals are making money, and so we want to inform them of how to make that money work for them and how to spend it accordingly. Digital literacy, learning how to use a computer, because we are a transitional workforce developer. So in that sense, we know that people are going to use us as a springboard and then go forward into other careers and being career minded, not just a regular job. We want to make sure that people are making a sustainable wage. We start at $13.50 with added bonuses that can bring them up to $15. And we expect that for their transition to be anywhere between $16 and $25 an hour. And we've done it. We've cycled through our individuals. We have a pretty good success rate with placing our individuals. We all offer employment coaching because we want individuals to be able to obtain the job, but also maintain it. Housing assistance, step-by-step, the employment application filing. If someone is not adept to knowing the computer and learning that, we will stand by them and sit by them and punch it in for them, because that's sometimes that's the only way. There aren't paper applications anymore in a lot of places, so we have to do it digitally. We do offer food assistance with our neighboring cupboards, and then we offer food cards for their families. Mindfulness training and conflict resolution training. Knowing oneself will allow someone to be self-aware. So when they are going into different employers, and in their own lives, our employees are learning, about themselves and how to work through their conflicts within their families to avoid any escalations. We are a paid workforce development trainer. So anybody that comes in here, they're getting on-the-job training. So they're earning as soon as they step foot in here. And we offer forklift certification, because not everybody is going to go into electronics recycling, but having some type of certificate that is credentialed for other places that is widely accepted. So we offer the forklift certification. And, you know, Lee, you had touched on some of the barriers to employment. Individuals have those fines and court costs, up to and including having to pay for being on supervision. So there's fines, court costs, and supervisory fees that must be paid in order to be quote unquote free or on probation or parole. So that's another added cost that wears on one that's returning. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like those foundational things are some of the things that are devoid in probably about 75% of all of our individuals. You're talking about food, shelter, you know, clothes, like the basics, right? And so if someone doesn't have a place to sleep, you know, that's going to be their primary function, is finding a place where they're going to sleep and be safe. Not necessarily finding a job, even though there's a throughput there. Like you got to have a job in order to, you know, be able to pay rent. But if they're trying to survive every day just to find a place to sleep, their energy is going to be placed in that way, right? So we try to meet those needs, meet everyone where they are, meet the needs as they arise, in order for everyone to have a firm foundation when they leave from us in that 4 to 6 month time.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking you for setting the appropriate context of the conversation. You know, when we talk about whether it's rehabilitation, any of these terms that we throw out, I think society puts a lot of expectations, unrealistic expectations on individuals, that whole bootstrap mentality, right? To achieve some form of transformation, most often without any of the supports that you all are providing, in order to merely get free from probation and supervision and move on with one's life without the state exercising constant control over their body. But socially, white society does not put that same expectation on ourselves to take accountability for our historical crimes, which include but are not limited to the active choice of bringing slavery in as a means of, as an institution and an economic vehicle, so to speak, and all of the laws and control around that. And I was really glad that you talked about kind of the accidental existence of jails and policing. And we think of them today, they're all couched in public safety and these terms that we are all very familiar with. But when you go deep into the history, you really see the linkage to this country's racist history and the institution of slavery. So I did post one of the books that we often have our new attorneys make sure that it is in their reading, because it talks a little bit more, creates some of that context on mass incarceration, is The New Jim Crow. So I posted something about that, but there's no shortage of books whatsoever. And you touched on a lot, and I can't, like, just listening to the litany of supports that you all provide is pretty amazing, that one organization under one umbrella is able to offer that holistic lift. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why that full piece picture is an essential part of getting someone out of the criminal justice system.
I think part of it is, I'm going to take a step back again. So there is a level of shaping that one has when they're approaching or thinking about criminal or prisoner or inmate, or in that thinking. You know, immediately you think of someone that's completely unlike us in that other sense. Like, they're not like us. So there's a label attached to make them unlike us, right? And so in that sense, when we think of a prisoner or an inmate or a parolee, there's a way to make it detached from us. Whereas we try to bring the humanity back to the person, because they've lost so much of a humanity by being known as a number, not the person. Then they are around others who don't know them as a person. They're a number. And so, like, you know, there's no transition from being that number to being a person when you come, when you're coming from prison or jail. So we want to introduce the person to themselves. Be you. Be you who you are. Remove the masks that are, because there are many, and be you. But then also in being you and being vulnerable, you got to be selective to who you are to other people. So we want to really focus on the other, the whole person in totality. So we take the approach of quality over quantity. So we see in any cohort probably about 5 to 7 people for a 4 to 6 month time frame, focusing on each person individually. And I think another approach that we have, we assume nothing. We have no idea what people are bringing forth. We meet people as icebergs. We have no idea the other things that they are carrying with them. And we approach each person as such. And, you know, focusing on removing our own biases, not being non-judgmental, and approaching it in that way. Also thinking about the having the vision for future, right? Yes, there have been many things that us as a nation has done to its inhabitants, right? We as a nation can move on from it, but we have to start identifying and identifying it as a wound that we must heal from versus a wound that we must cover up with a Band-Aid. We all have wounds. We've all had them. If you don't give it the proper attention, what happens? It gets infected. That's exactly what has happened here. It's an infection that we will not address, right? Because it makes us feel some type of way, or, you know, I'm trying to figure out what, in my understanding, what hurts making things equal. What hurts? I mean, I don't think it will hurt many of us if others were equal to us, right? Like, see people as people, human race as one in totality, right? Where we all have we all have this humanity within us. So everybody deserves the mutual respect. If we get back to mutual respect, a lot of things will be much smoother, right? We have that understanding. There was a question in the chat that said, I use returning citizen in describing foreign employees. I hate that too. Let me be very, very honest. That's something that Mayor Nutter had adapted back in 2012 to identify people that are returning home from prison. But we are a trauma-informed care organization where we are person first. You know, I hate that term, but that's just a term that's widely used. I think that if we get back to understanding that people are people, people have committed crimes, people are returning, very recently there was an article that I read about quote unquote inmates in the all women's prison in New Jersey that's being closed, right? And I'm thinking, the abuses that happen to those women, not inmates, because we don't treat animals the way we treat the people that are in prison. We do not. That's against the law, the way we treat animals. But if you look, prisons are very, 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 very similar in the way, we prosecute the people that are mean to animals, but we are treating people the same way. I think that's a really good similarity. I mean, we don't treat animals the way we treat the people that are residents in these facilities.
Following up on that point, I know we're wandering a little bit, but I think it's such an important point, and it's something I've thought, like, we in this office often talk about putting people in cages, right? To really let people understand, like, that, because that is what we're talking about when we're putting people in jail. The example that comes to mind when you say, we don't allow people to treat animals this way are daily occurrences for our clients, for example, where if they are alleged to engage in certain behavior, and maybe they have or maybe they haven't engaged in that behavior, it's pretty acceptable for guards to slam them, put them down, put their hands on their body, and do all sorts of things. Whereas that same activity, human to a dog, might actually result in a criminal charge. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
That's exactly right. I think that's, I think if we put it in that thinking, are we saying that the people that are in prison are less important than the dogs that we take care of, or that the animals that we raise? I think not. I think that, you know, there's a level of respect for all humankind, all humanity, all of our environment in totality. And that brings us to the other side of why we are in existence and why we chose recycling electronics as a tool to the workforce development. The electronics recycling is the fastest growing waste stream in the United States, actually in the world. And right here in the United States, it's expected to go up about 500%. And so entrepreneur-minded, you know, and civic organizations to get behind recycling because it's good for our environment.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, and the one is one that I will direct to both Andrew and Maurice, which is the League of Women Voters is an organization with a high profile as a watchdog, as well as a source of reliable, nonpartisan information about how our political and civic systems work. How can we criminal system, criminal justice system?
I can think of one right away. All right, so with you guys being with the League of Women Voters being that high profile, or thinking about the people that are in Delaware County and the businesses that are in Delaware County, those businesses, how are they? How do they benefit from the privatization of prisons? Thinking of one like Whole Foods, like they use prison labor. Thinking about Walmart, use prison labor. You have a Dell computer that you're sitting in front of, they use prison labor. However, on the other side, when it comes to hiring individuals that come home from prison, they are like staunch against it. So how people are good enough to build the product, make the product, package the product, but aren't good enough to be front facing to earn a living wage. That's a problem. So that I think, you know, just spending where your values really are. And then also, you know, keeping track of those legislators who vote in a way that's going to continue for this system to be manipulated the way it is. It's a broken system that has been in existence for a very long time. And it's not all going to change at once, but keeping track of who those individuals are and then holding them accountable. Saying, hey, listen, you voted in this way. You know, we have your record that you voted in this way to build another prison or to give more monies to these other prisons or prison-like or prison-focused projects. When we should be thinking about how can we build the communities back as a whole versus the separatization.
What can we do to get part recycling resources and structure so that we can bring you to Delaware County for our clients?
I love to hear that. I think that's a way to, maybe we get some sponsors. Maybe we don't have to wait for Delco, but those businesses that I mentioned, maybe they would love to sponsor in a way some accountability. Hey, listen, we can bring PAR to there and you can train them up for these specific jobs in particular. I mean, like, we can come to Delaware County, right? But we want to make sure that there are businesses in Delaware County that will hire the individuals that we train. And, you know, that's low-hanging fruit. We can go and say, hey, listen, will you hire individuals or at least entertain hiring individuals that we train up? You know, that's all we want. We want to employ people, but we want to also make sure that we're not setting them up for failure. Hey, come work for us for 6 months or 8 months, and then what? It won't take much to get me to Delaware County, I promise.
Excellent. I'm going to back up a little bit. You made reference to your services included counseling, and also, you know, you talked about some of the challenges with probation. I have two questions that were pre-submitted. One is about what kinds of counseling are available to those who are reintegrating into community, and then the other is seeking a little more information about the impact of parole and probation, terms and conditions on how that affects people who are reentering?
So I'll answer the second one first. So depending on the individual and the record that they've had, probation can be pretty expensive. At present, right now, I have 2 clients or 2 employees that are on house arrest. And so if they're going to be out late, or they schedule, or if their schedule isn't, in by a certain time, they can't work. So as the employer, I understand that, but a traditional employer is not going to want to jump through those hoops for an individual that is on like pre-trial confinement or on house arrest. But that person needs a job in order to provide for their family, in order to stay on house arrest. So that's one instance in helping individuals. What was your other question? I'm sorry, I lost train of thought.
You're muted, Lee.
I was trying to read her lips.
Never works if the moderator is muted. That's never a good thing. Sometimes people knock on my door. I need to improve my sign that says in conference, keeps falling off. So the other question was about what kinds of counseling are available for people who are reentering. And I think it's helpful for people to get a sense of what kinds of counseling is or is not available while people are incarcerated, as well as when they get out.
So for us, what we do, we have a case manager that meets with them twice a week to focus on some of those barriers to employment, namely housing and food insecurity, to make sure we're giving them a level foundation. And then we have a mentor that comes every Monday that does that one-on-one work that will include punctuality, integrity, some points some fine-tuned points that will get them employed. And from time to time, we will have some therapists that will donate some time to meet one-on-one with our clients to give some continuity, to draw out some more of those challenges that individuals are there, that individuals have there. Inside of the prison, there aren't there are counselors, but they're not counseling. They're more of, meeting the quota. I met with 10 people today or 15 people today, and all seems well. It doesn't look like anyone's going to harm themselves. So it's about meeting the quota, not the person. It's not about meeting the person in mass.
And if someone weren't hooked up to a program such as yours, and just like what will happen in Delaware County, someone might just get a token and they're off on the bus and see ya, here are your conditions, report back when expected. What might their journey look like in terms if they were trying to seek out counseling or just get a job or maintain their
Lee, where are they going to go? Can I back up? Where are they going to go? What if they have nowhere to go? What if they have no family? They have no friends, no support system. They're just out. So where are they going to go? So that person in particular that has nowhere to go, their first instance is to find somewhere to sleep. Where are they going to sleep from that interim, that first instance of, okay, I'm free and I'm out? Or are they a resident of Delaware County? They may be a resident of Montgomery County or Philadelphia County or Bucks or others where they can't get to those places where they can go. So then that becomes their first step. But the first step is making sure that they have all the things they need in order to be successful. Like, do they have an ID? Do they have a social security card? Do they have that in their hand in order to be able to say, that next day I'm trying to get a job. I'm gonna go to, a fast food place or a retail place in order to just get jump started, because that could be a barrier within itself. But the systems, it seems like the systems aren't built for the individual that have served their time or has been released. It doesn't seem like they're built for them to succeed. So in order for them to be successful at reintegrating or transitioning back to society, there are some tools that they need in order to do that. Whether it be like straight up direction, like step-by-step directions. Hey, these are the things that you need to do in order to get in. There might, Rep. Zabel talked about pay in prison. So some people, if somebody has spent a amount of time in prison and they made upwards to 42 cents an hour or something like that, I'm not sure they'll have the motivation to work when they come home. Because what is my retribution for working? Like, what am I going to receive for working when, you know, I receive 42 cents? And so like that mindset has to be rebuilt or refocused. So I think giving people the tools in order to be successful will be key. Like I don't know if it's a reentry toolkit, which maybe Lee and I and, you know, Andrew could maybe very well build a reentry toolkit. I don't know if it's a mentor walking with them, or, you know, maybe a bunch say, hey, listen, I'm responsible for you 5. When you guys come out, I'm going to be responsible and I'm going to help you get settled. And that could be on a volunteer basis or a new program. I mean, I really don't know. I do know that there are challenges ahead, and in those challenges are opportunities for us to do something different than what we've already done. We know what we've already done doesn't work very well. And so, you know, being solution oriented, I think if we know that we want to reduce recidivism, we want to reduce crime, we want to help individuals transition to be citizens of their, you know, where they are, successful citizens. That's what we want to do. Then we have to focus on making sure that they are well-rounded individuals to do that.
And I will let you know that Delaware County, under the new council and with some assistance from state funding, has accumulated a small grant that is helping us create a reentry coalition with solid action plans. And you know, the goal is to not have this just be another coalition that just sits there and becomes a block for actually getting things done. There's a lot of momentum around it at this moment that will be seeking funding for some human resources dedicated to it, and hopefully move some of these things forward. But at this moment, our local jail, which is George W. Hill, does not have a strong reentry program. We don't have any kind of ID assistance. So there are many people who leave there that don't have any kind of ID in hand, don't have their social security number, so they're not going to be able to get benefits. So that's a very clear start. And unfortunately, the question about where people going to go in Delaware County may not be as prevalent because people are being held in jail because they cannot provide a verified address. And that's a different kind of problem, because being homeless is not a valid basis for being kept in jail. So all of those are excellent points, and I thank you. And Andrew, Christy, if someone's making 42 cents while they are incarcerated, are they going to keep that amount?
Well, maybe. I think what Lee's alluding to is that as just to add insult to injury, while folks are incarcerated, our majestic legislature has instructed the Department of Corrections that they should garnish those inmate accounts to take money away from them to pay for fines or costs or restitution. And I think it's, if you have more than $10 in your account, then it's 25% of any deposits to that account that are made on a monthly basis, including, you know, gifts from your friends and family. I mean, if you need to buy necessities at the commissary, which, you know, spoiler alerts, not all the necessities are actually provided for by the prison for free, then you know, it's a perfectly normal, ordinary thing for gifts to come in to help cover, to allow you to afford to purchase that stuff. And the Department of Corrections takes some of that money away, and just despite extensive litigation over the past couple of decades about that, it's a perfectly acceptable practice. Yeah, I mean, it's just shocking the ways that, and the movement in the legislature on that point, by the way, is not that they want to reform that. It's that maybe 25% isn't enough. Maybe we should be taking 50% of their deposits. So it's pretty horrible stuff.
Hey, Andrew, can you talk about the profitization of like the markup of like the materials that people get inside the prison, like those essentials like deodorant and soap and the food, and how there's a real major markup from the products that are out here?
I can't really, because I frankly don't know much about it, Maurice, and probably you know more about it than I do, because I can parrot what you just told me, and I know that's true. I mean, the most common thing that I do know a little bit about where people really get raked over the coals is in terms of trying to make phone calls, because if you're unaware, phone calls from prison are not free. There are, I mean, I don't, Maurice, do you know what the rates are in Pennsylvania these days?
Yeah, for a 15-minute phone call, it's about $5.50.
Yeah, so you're making 40 cents an hour, and then how long does it take you to save up for that? Oh, and if your family gives you money to make phone calls, then oh yeah, some of that money is going away to pay any of this court debt. There's no reason it has to be this way. I mean, there's no law that says that prisons and county jails have to charge that much. I mean, in Philadelphia, there's an effort led by I think it's the Philadelphia Office of Economic Empowerment, if I remember correctly. It's part of the city government. It's essentially their anti-poverty office, and so they are sort of leading the effort in Philly to end those fees associated with phone calls, or at least significantly reduce them to something that is a little more in line with what it actually costs, rather than just trying to make money. And because what happens is that all these I know that you all are working hard to get rid of your private prison in Delaware County and turn it back over to state control. And what happens is that when these things are outsourced to private contractors, as the phone call services are, then they see it as an opportunity, of course, to make profit. And it's a captive, I mean, it's literally a captive audience that has no other choice. And so there's no one to push back. And if the government doesn't care, because the government isn't spending any money on these phone calls, because the money is being passed on to the people actually making the calls, I mean, there's no accountability or oversight.
Yeah. I'm going to turn back to you, Andrew, the question that we posed previously, which is the League of Women Voters is an organization with a high profile as a watchdog, as well as a source of reliable nonpartisan information about how our political and civic systems work. How can we leverage that to advocate effectively to improve the criminal justice system?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that in my mind, one of the places to start is like actually knowing what's going on the ground, which when you're dealing with, I mean, there's a lot, there are a lot of different threads that have been pulled on in the past hour and 18 minutes. But if you, so the area that is a little bit more in my wheelhouse is in terms of like what's actually going on in court and what are judges doing, because Maurice has obviously described a whole host of issues and problems that people face when they return from jail and from prison. And one of those, to link it back to my area, is the court debt, the probation supervision fees, and other court costs that people have. Why are those being imposed on people in the first place? What is happening in court? Like, what kind of discussion is happening, and what kind of rulings are judges making? I'm just going to go out on a limb, and I certainly don't mean any offense here, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say probably no one on this call really, except for Lee, probably really has spent a lot of time in court watching criminal proceedings in Delaware County, and really knows like what's going on at those criminal sentencings in terms of what does the judge know about each person's financial situation or their other living situations. How often does a judge know, for example, that someone has permanent disabilities and subsists on SSI from the Social Security Administration, or how often does the judge know that someone's getting food stamps and nevertheless impose these thousands of dollars on them, but then come back to bite them and serve as another form of essentially control over the person, and this is perhaps again most punitive at the common pleas level, but don't forget about your magisterial district judges. Magisterial district judges deal with statewide. They deal with about 2 million cases every year, compared to about 150, 200,000 common pleas cases. So the vast majority are happening in MDJ courts. No one knows what happens in MDJ courts because there's no court reporter. There's no record about what's going on. And so if you're looking for So I think the place to start is to just do some court watching, and it doesn't necessarily need to be you're not gathering evidence for a lawsuit, right? So it's not like you need to go watch every proceeding and keep detailed notes in a consistent manner necessarily. But one of the things I wanted to say before we hop off is that there are political pressure points, I think, and not only in terms of what the legislature can do, but also your local elected officials. And here I'm thinking about the district attorney. So, I'm helping out with some cases right now out of Lee's office involving $1,000 fines that are imposed on impoverished people. Why is the district attorney defending this? And why is the district attorney going to the Superior Court and saying these fines are appropriate and they should be imposed even if the person can't afford to pay it? The district attorney is an elected official, and as long as we're going to elect DAs, shouldn't they be responsive to their constituents, aka all of you fine folks? And another, in terms of both sort of the affordability of what they're doing, but also the DA is the one that keeps people on probation indefinitely if they aren't paying. And I imagine that most people aren't calling up. Probably no one is calling up and saying, dear district attorney, I'm one of your constituents. Please make sure. Please let people off of probation. Why are we making it harder for them to earn money to repay the court, for example, among all the other reasons why you don't want to keep our people on probation forever. And the same to some extent also goes with judges. I mean, it's weird that we elect judges because they are they also, the people we elect, we're their constituents as well, but we also shouldn't, so we don't want to tell them to rule one way or another in a certain case. But I think it is appropriate, particularly at election time, whether it's a retention election or someone running for the first time, to ask questions about, how much do you know about poverty? And how much do you know about the impact of what the judges are doing has on people who are really struggling out there? And you can talk about fines and costs as an example. Bail, of course, is another. Cash bail is another great example. But I just want to make it clear that there is legislation out there, and there's a good fines and costs bill that's being run by Representative Dan Miller. It's let's see, it's HB 248, and I'll put that in the chat in case anyone that you can talk to your representative about looking into and potentially co-sponsoring and helping get moving. And you certainly have that avenue. But I also think there are some other local political pressure points that you could potentially work on. So just some thoughts.
Thanks, Andrew. And I'm sorry because there are a lot of great comments and questions in the chat, and I missed the scroll as it was happening. So I'm going to go back and try and hit on a couple of the easy short ones very quickly. And then I know we're running up against the clock, but we'll get into the remaining ones and see how we do. So one of the questions is, can you start working with a person before they leave prison so they have a plan going forward? And the answer that I'm going to give, and there may be more commentary on that, is that yes, in theory one can. In order to do it here in Delaware County, you would have to be able to coordinate with the jail management, which is currently GEO, and that may create some obstacles. But if you are interested in advancing that endeavor, one, keep an eye out for the Delaware County Reentry Coalition, which should be getting some more press profile in the next 6 months as they roll out their strategic plan. And if you are interested in participating or getting more information about that beforehand in the next 6 months, you're welcome to reach out to me and I can connect you. And in addition, you can check out the Jail Oversight Board here in Delaware County. They have regular meetings, and there are a group of individuals who serve on that Jail Oversight Board who will be voting on a lot of decisions regarding that administration. And I know I saw at one point Ellen Morfe here, and I think she's been connected with that group and other groups within the county, and I hope I just pronounced her last name correctly. The other question I think is directed probably at Maurice, which is, do you work with Covanta in Chester?
I don't.
So, and I am not familiar with them, but maybe I should be. So I'm going to write it down and do a little research. Increased unsolved gun crime has increased in Philadelphia, and gun violence is a very big issue right here in Delaware County, in Chester in particular, and our district attorney is focusing heavily on it. And the question is, do you all have any thoughts or on solutions or related insights on that?
Yeah, so what we try to do is go out to some of these sites where they're happening, like right after or soon after, and try to do some community building right there on the site. We're not trying to dare to get answers, and we're just trying to make sure that, you know, one crime doesn't turn into another, because a lot of the gun violence is neighborhood warring or interfaction warring when we live streets over from each other. So we try to go out right there. Solving gun crime is, you know, I want to say it's multifaceted. It's multifaceted because we don't have a Smith & Wesson warehouse or, you know, manufacturer here in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania. You know, so these guns aren't just falling off the backs of trucks or the back doors aren't being opened to these gun manufacturers. So where are they coming from? Yeah, you can't blame them all on ghost guns coming through the mail, because that's bogus. So where are they coming from? And so we start like digging into these questions and find out where the sources of the guns are coming from. We can kind of put a plug in it, or a dam. You know, this is a dam that's overflowing. So what can we do? And then find out what the root causes are for these violences. A lot of it's ego. A lot of it's a false sense of ego and pride. But overall, when we talk to the children that are outside of these gun crimes, what we see is that we know that the person that has committed the crime cannot get what the life that they took. They can't get it. They can't get the glitz and the glamour or the stature or that person's bravado. So we're trying to figure out like what is the lead cause behind it. I don't have a clue, but we're trying to alleviate it happening again.
Yeah, and you know, one just very brief, I guess perhaps obvious point to go along with that is that, you know, to the extent that we have policies in the criminal justice system that just exacerbate income inequality and exacerbate pushing people further into poverty, why are we doing that? And isn't that just making the situation worse? I mean, that's what all the research and data says. Well, maybe we should reconsider the status quo and what the criminal justice system is and the way that it operates, so that we're at the very least not adding on to those economic hardships. So.
Another question in the chat and is not from my voice, and I say this because I have gotten in some trouble in the past for misperceptions about my involvement with lawsuits against counties. But since homelessness is not a crime, can the ACLU litigate against holding people in jail for not having an address? When people are held for not having an address, who pays for their incarceration? These behaviors against incarcerated people seem arbitrary, brutal, and inhumane. The word is oppression. So
we can litigate anything. So if you bring us a good case, we'll litigate it. But to be more serious, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, this is like this is really a debtor's prison problem, basically, where you have people who are being held incarcerated only because of economic situation, because of their economic situation, but we can't. So you know, to the extent that you have specific individuals who are in these circumstances, then like please reach out and connect us, because we are a reactive. I mean, for better or worse, we're a reactive organization that doesn't always know what's going on. But the answer is yes. I mean, you can't. The state can't just keep someone in jail because they don't, because they are too poor to get an apartment or something along those lines.
And we are getting close to wrapping up. There was another question that I kind of skipped over because it blended into one that had been presented previously, but are there opportunities for us to push for better reintegration services as Delaware County is transitioning away from our private prison, are there ways to interject change at this point to support transitioning? So I referred to the growing reentry coalition is one opportunity for proactive involvement in building things. And the jail oversight board is a decision-making body locally right here that is going to make a lot of decisions and also, you know, is engaged in evaluation and has responsibilities around conditions for our local jail. And that is, they have public meetings and receive public comment. The county council right now is making a lot of decisions around criminal justice in general, both on the juvenile and adult side. And so their council meetings often have interesting things to look out for. And then of course, the initiatives that Rep. Zabel and others have referred to here. I hope that answers that. But if you all have additional questions and want to talk to any of us, I know I'm putting them on the spot, but I'm pretty confident that any of us would be happy to field additional questions via email, and I will forward those as I receive them to try and connect people. The Covanta, clarification, is the largest trash incinerator in the country, and it's located in Chester and burns all of our trash. And I should know that because I know there's a big environmental justice issue right here in our own community about why it is that Chester is bearing the brunt of our poor environmental activities and the pollution and health effects that can come with that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Also breaking news, Governor Wolf is coming to Delco tomorrow, Thursday, June 17th at 11:30 a.m. to Media Courthouse on the steps to address election protections and voting rights. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for keeping us posted on that. And the information on HB 248 is posted in the chat as well. So I want to thank everyone for their time. It is as exciting for me and interesting for me to hear the perspectives of our panelists as it is energizing to see the brain trust of all of these participants and know that everyone here has taken time out of their day and other days as well to focus on these issues and help move our county and our communities forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, panel. Say the League of Women Voters Central Delaware County and the NAACP Media Branch would like to thank our presenters, Lee and Maurice, Andrew, and Representative Zabel for an excellent presentation. Your multifaceted approach is truly a model for the League. And it is encouraging to hear that people who block the camera, you know, before they start talking, there's no criminal offense for that. We commend you for all the important work you do and greatly appreciate you educating us today.
Yes.
The League of Women Voters is in 51 states and DC, Hong Kong, and the US Virgin Islands. If you are a member of the League of Women Voters, we thank you for your support. If you are not a member and would like to join us, please visit our website at LWV-CDC.org. And we hope you join us for our upcoming programs. And to get details, registration, and more information about these and other upcoming events, check on the website. And the next Civics Zoom program, I think, is being scheduled for September of this year. So thank you for attending and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you, speakers.